Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jensen with CCJ 3701, Research Methods in Criminology. So I'm going to quickly go through common mistakes in results sections. I kind of feel like Chewie sometimes where I'm on a rampage and I'm picking up stormtroopers and throwing them around the room. Because sometimes these mistakes are very simple. But again, I know how daunting a results section is to write. There are technical pieces and just plain English pieces, and they can get all wrapped up with each other. And then you're kind of working through SPSS. So it's pulling a lot of skills together. So I know how frustrating it can be. But I make this list as kind of a way to be a checklist, working through your results section, fixing mistakes that come up. So let's go through that now. And again, you can fast forward to any one of these that you want and go through it again and check your paper. But these are very common ones that I see all the time. Check the capitalization of variables. Most variables do not need to be capitalized in your narrative. So we don't say age, gender, marital status, region. It just should be age, gender, marital status, region. Okay. So these are nouns, just common nouns. When you list them in a table, like a frequency in your descriptive tables or in a regression table or a bivariate table, yes, you capitalize. But when you refer to them, don't give them a capital name, okay? They're very plain and they stay that way. So still use the proper rules of grammar when trying to determine if you capitalize. Now that being said, we would capitalize the word Hispanic, or we would capitalize the word African American, okay? So there are some rules that come into, titles of names of groups and things like that. But for just plain old gender, plain old marital status, nah, you don't do that. Do not interpret coefficients or odds ratios or exponential b's that are not significant. What is the point of reporting the increases or decreases in the coefficients for linear or the greater and lesser likelihoods in the odds ratios for logistic in those two regressions if you cannot rule out chance that your finding is actually true? So why drag your reader through all the details of the result when we don't know that it's true? So don't go into detail on a finding that isn't significant. It's still a finding, you just simply report name of variable was not significant, and then move on, okay, to the next thing. When interpreting nominal variables with categories, be sure to indicate the comparison groups so that we remember kind of how that variable was measured. Because I'll tell you right now, the reader's probably not going to go all the way back to your method section and go, how did they code that? Who is in the variable? It's just more convenient for them to see it right in the result when they're reading about it. So like this, males tend to commit 1.2 more delinquent acts as compared to females. Okay, so the 1 was a male, the 0 was a female. I'm reminding the reader the female was the comparison group in my variable. Or we could say it this way. Non-whites tend to be 2.4 times more likely to live in poverty compared to whites. Okay, so again, you can just briefly remind the reader who your comparison group is when you're doing these 0-1 style variables so they can kind of keep track of what the comparison is. Never, ever, ever use SPSS output in your results. That's what tables are for. So remember, SPSS output provides the calculations and additional statistical processing that we don't report in results section. This output is useful to us when we're troubleshooting. It's the behind the scenes stuff, but it is not important to the reader, okay? So it's tempting to just drop your output into your paper, but overwhelming for someone to go through. There's a lot of stuff in there we never ever report. It's just part of the processing. So do not be tempted to do that. Come up with a clear and accurate title for your regression table. The easiest one would be, something like this. Table 4, determinants of, insert your dependent variable, determinants of poverty. Table 4, predictors of the parent-child relationship, or Table 4, factors predicting delinquency. Those are all just different ways of writing up a title, saying determinants of something, predictors of something, factors of something. That's fine. But don't just put the word table or Table 4. Every table should have a title. And please do not misspell the word determinants and actually say determinates. I actually see that a lot. That's just a spelling error. You are finding determinants, not determinates. Be sure to indicate the units of analysis in a linear regression. So again, you're using quantities in linear. It might be points on a scale, thousands of dollars, but you need to make sure the reader remembers what that is. Again, they're not going to go to your methods section to remind themselves, so it's just convenient to include it here. So when you start writing up what these coefficients mean, thousands of dollars, number of children, number of delinquent acts, points on a scale, pounds, frequency of attendance, intensity of attitude or feeling, number of drugs they've taken, percents in a percentage rate, make sure you include that as you write up what it means. Okay? So they remember kind of what that number tells us. There are many ways to indicate statistical significance. So these three ways, these first three bullets will give you a few examples, just different ways of saying the same thing. A child's religiosity was statistically significant in predicting their trust with parents. Religiosity was significant at the p is less than 0.0001 level. Religiosity was a strong predictor of parental trust, and you can put in parentheses what the significance level was, like 0.03. Okay, so that would all just be three different ways of saying essentially the same thing in a different way. And you can kind of mix things up so you're not kind of regurgitating the same sentence over and over again. And it keeps it interesting to read. Do not write. This is repetitive and saying the same thing. A child's religiosity was highly statistically significant in predicting their trust with parents at the p is less than 0.01 level. Significance is 0.03. That's overkill. You're saying significant, 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 and, kind of overdoing it. Okay, so, and that also tells me you don't really know what you're saying. So just pick one way that works for you, mix things up, and, saying it in different ways keeps it interesting to read. And you have to kind of remind yourself the results section is the unsexy section. You're simply reporting results. It's a little bit dry to write and read. There's only so many ways to say statistical significance because that's how we say it. So keep things interesting as best you can. Because it reads more like a report. Save your hypotheses, whether you supported them or rejected them, you failed to reject, or any confirmations of hypotheses for your discussion section. So you'll have another video that goes through that a little bit better, okay, about how to write about how your hypotheses did. And remember, your hypothesis is just a prediction, but it's really tempting to kind of jump the gun and start writing about those in your results section. Don't do that. That belongs in your discussion section. Also, do not elaborate on your findings in the results section either. You're merely reporting what you found, okay? It's just a report. This is what I ran. This is what I got. That's it. Redundancy and repetition. Use your first paragraph to remind the reader concisely how you measured your topics. You don't have to do that, but some people find that useful to kind of keep themselves organized. Refer to changes or differences in results as you write. So you can kind of take a little more shortcuts. You've already kind of told the reader about the variables, so you can kind of just refer to the changes later. They don't need to be rehashed a little. This is my variable 101 all over again for every single paragraph you talk about it. Don't be lumpy or choppy in your writing, jumping from one variable to the next or skipping conjunctions of the and. This is confusing to read. For some reason, people's grammar skills go out the window when they start writing results sections, and it starts coming out in little chunks. So remember, this is a reporting section. It should read like a narrative. You are telling me the story of your findings, so make it easy to listen to. I should be able to hear it read out loud and follow what you're doing. Flippity floppity hippity hoppity. Make sure you keep track of your independent variable and your dependent variable. People can flip them in SPSS, but they can also flip them when they talk about them. Do not flip-flop your research question. That would be predicting a different outcome, which is an entirely new paper. So if your research question is how does divorce impact delinquency, your results should not be for every 1 unit increase in delinquency or acts a juvenile commits, they increase their divorce by 0.42. You've just now changed the question to how does delinquency impact divorce? And by the way, how do you increase divorce? That doesn't even make any sense. I know what you're trying to say, but you flip-flopped the question, and now you have this nonsense sentence that needs to be addressed. It's easy to do. It's a very technical paper to write, and it's easy to lose track of these things because you have so much you got to write about and get out, and you're trying to meet a deadline. This will happen. So if you start finding yourself going while you're trying to keep track of it all, it might be time to take a break, walk away, refresh, and come back to it, and then you can try to prevent some of these things from going on. Be specific in your variable names in your table, especially for nominal variables. So I'm going to always ask you, which one? So don't just say, I controlled for gender. Call it what it is, males, whoever your one is. Don't say race. Call it whoever your one is, blacks, minorities, Asians, Latinos. Don't call it marital status. Tell me who you're looking at in the marital status. Divorced, single, cohabiting. You're probably pulling one of these groups out of the nominal variable, so tell me which one you're focused on. Okay, be as specific as you can. Because race could be a lot of races, gender could be a lot of genders, marital status, a lot of marital statuses. So which one did you have in mind when you were testing it? That being said, sometimes, again, we write nonsense sentences, and I've literally seen students do this. What is a 1 unit increase in gender? Or I've just increased their race by 0.5. I'm like, what? How do you increase somebody's race? Or they say, I was able to predict their age or predict their, their racial group. And I was like, how do you do that? Something that's kind of static. I mean, predicting race, that's something you're born with. Predicting gender, the same kind of a thing. Chances are they rearranged things and made a mistake. So if you find yourself writing out 1 unit increases in gender, you're probably doing something wrong. Okay, the interpretation is not correct. Just a couple more things. Formatting. Make sure you indent your interpretation paragraphs. This is actually part of your narrative in your paper, so it deserves a good indentation at the first part. Make sure those paragraphs are double-spaced. Put the shorter interpretations together into one paragraph, such as when a model has nothing significant. So if you just have like a little one-liner and you're moving on to some new territory, if you need to, you can just attach that maybe to the last paragraph so you don't have this floating little one-sentence paragraph in your paper. When you're doing your table, you really only need to report 1 to 2 decimal places. 3 really is not necessary. I don't think we're getting much out of thousandths of a place. So you can say things like 1.25 times more likely, 1.2 times more likely, or you can say the coefficient was 0.02. You don't need to kind of drag us into all of this stuff. You can just use 2 decimal spots and then cut it off. Did your coefficient or likelihood change to this number or increase or decrease by this much? So it'd be really easy to write up a confusing sentence. So here's the SPSS output. The coefficient for age in the previous model was 1.56, and it decreased to 1.50 in the next model. Maybe you want to describe that change. But you wrote something, like this. The coefficient decreased by 0.06 from 1.56 to 1.50. Meaning that for every 1 year a person increases in age, their marital relationship score decreases by 1.5 points on the scale. That would be fine, but make sure you don't write something like, the coefficient decreased by 1.50. No, it didn't decrease by that much. It decreased to that much. So just be careful of the usage of the words by or to. Last thing I'll talk about, leaving out important parts of interpretation. This can be a big ding on your score. So no discussion of the odds ratio or coefficient at all. So if you just say something, divorce was significant with socioeconomic status. That's it, really? Well, what were the numbers telling us? Some people are intimidated by the statistics that SPSS spits out, so they kind of just write up the English stuff, but they don't tell us the stats. You say unmarried individuals were less likely to own a home than people who were married. Well, how much less likely? You should have an odds ratio that tells you that. You should have a coefficient that tells us about socioeconomic status. That's what statistics are for. So please don't skip those parts. That's kind of a big part of this class, right? Second part, no discussion of the constant. And this is only for linear regression when the constant is positive. Occasionally it'll get negative constants, which we really don't spend a lot of time on. They are mathematically possible, but they don't make much sense when writing them into English. So if you have a positive constant, you need to write about it. The constant of 2.3 tells us that knowing nothing about an individual, we would expect on average that a person would somewhat disagree with whether or not sex prior to marriage is wrong. The ordinal variable included responses ranked from 1 to 4, with a response of 4 indicating strong disagreement and 1 indicating strong agreement. So you can kind of, again, if you're going to talk about a constant, you might want to remind the reader of how it was measured. So if you get a 2.3 constant, we got to go, well, it ranked from 1 to 4, and so 2.3 is about, in the middle. That would help the reader kind of understand that constant better. So those are, again, just ways to address mistakes in the results section. Hopefully you found this helpful. Reach out if you are confused by any of it, and we can work on that part together. Thank you, and good luck.